Something strange happened to me last week. I was deep into researching the dark night of the soul for a video. You know, that mystical experience where everything you thought you knew falls apart and you're left in this void of meaning. When someone in my immediate family came to me and said they were experiencing depression. Both hit me at the same time, and it made me stop and ask, are these the same thing? Is all depression just a spiritual crisis we're medicating away? Or are we romanticizing real medical suffering by calling it a spiritual awakening? Because here's the thing. We live in this weird time where on one side, we're told depression is purely a brain disease, a chemical imbalance you fix with pills like diabetes or high blood pressure. On the other side, there's this growing spiritual perspective that says depression is your soul rebelling against a life that isn't working. A call to transformation, not medication. So, which is it? Is depression a medical disease like fever? A mental health crisis created by your mind? Or a spiritual dark night of the soul? Today, I want to explore this with you. Not to give easy answers, but to help us navigate this confusion with more nuance. Because I think understanding the difference could literally save lives, including maybe yours or someone you love. Let's start with what we know clinically about depression. When someone is diagnosed with clinical depression, they're experiencing a cluster of symptoms: persistent low mood that doesn't lift, loss of interest in things they used to enjoy, what clinicians call anhedonia, changes in sleep and appetite, low energy, difficulty concentrating, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, and sometimes thoughts of self-harm or suicide. And there are measurable biological changes happening. We can see neurotransmitter dysregulation, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine all out of balance. We see inflammation markers elevated, stress hormones like cortisol chronically elevated or dysregulated. In brain scans, we can even see structural changes, the hippocampus shrinking, activity patterns shifting. This is real, this is measurable, this is physical. But here's where it gets interesting and complicated. What causes those biological changes? Sometimes it's clearly biological. Genetics, brain injury, hormonal shifts like postpartum depression or thyroid issues. But often, the biological changes are the result of something else. Chronic stress from impossible life circumstances. Trauma, especially developmental trauma or relational trauma in childhood. Profound loneliness and disconnection. Work that feels utterly meaningless. Living inauthentically. Pretending to be someone you're not for years. And here's the one that hit home for me. Neglect. Emotional neglect. Relational neglect. Spiritual neglect. So yes, the brain changes are real, but they're often the body's response to something deeper. The fever metaphor is actually really useful here. When you have a fever, that's real and measurable. Your temperature is elevated. But the fever isn't the problem. It's your body's response to an infection. Treating only the fever with Tylenol might make you feel better temporarily, but it doesn't address the underlying infection. Depression might work the same way. The neurochemical changes are real, but they might be the signal, not the source. So, what about this dark night of the soul thing? The term comes from a 16th century Spanish mystic, Saint John of the Cross. He described a very specific spiritual experience, the stripping away of all consolations, all certainties, all the familiar sense of meaning or divine presence that had previously sustained someone on their spiritual path. Here are the key characteristics. First, it usually happens to people who are actively on a spiritual journey. This isn't random suffering. It's happening to someone who's been seeking, practicing, devoted. Second, it involves the loss of previous sources of meaning and consolation. The practices that used to bring comfort, prayer, meditation, whatever, suddenly feel empty. The beliefs that made sense suddenly feel hollow. The sense of divine presence or cosmic order that was there before, gone. Third, it feels like abandonment, like God or the universe or truth itself has turned away. You're in this void, this darkness, this profound not knowing. But, and this is crucial, the mystics understood this as purgative, as leading somewhere, as part of a transformation. It's not purposeless suffering. It's the dissolution of an old identity, an old way of relating to the sacred, to make room for something deeper and more real. There's often a sense, even if you can't articulate it, of being called towards something unknown. In more secular language, you might call this an existential crisis or a meaning crisis. The structures that gave your life coherence have collapsed. Who you thought you were is dissolving. Your old answers don't work anymore. Nothing makes sense. And here's the thing. From the outside, this can look identical to depression. The person can't function, has lost interest in life, is suffering profoundly. But the source is different. So how do we tell the difference? Let me give you a framework. Depression as disease or trauma response. This can happen to anyone, regardless of whether they're on any kind of spiritual path. It often has clear triggers: loss, trauma, chronic stress, neglect, abuse. It feels like something is broken, like I am broken. There's shame, worthlessness, a sense of fundamental defectiveness. There's anhedonia, the complete inability to feel pleasure, even in things that used to bring joy. Everything is flat, gray, dead. It may include suicidal ideation without any sense of meaning or purpose to the suffering. It's just, I want this pain to stop, and death seems like the only way. This type of depression typically responds well to treatment. Therapy, especially trauma-focused therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, addressing the external stressors. The key question someone in this state needs to ask is, what do I need to heal? What wound is this pointing to? Dark night as spiritual crisis. This usually happens mid-journey to people who've been actively seeking meaning, practicing spirituality, or living with a strong sense of purpose. Previous sources of meaning no longer work. The answers you had feel hollow. The practices that sustained you feel empty. It feels like being between identities. The old self is dying, but the new self hasn't emerged yet. There's disorientation, not just depression. There's suffering, absolutely. But there's also, if you listen carefully, a sense of gestation, of something trying to emerge, of being called towards something you can't yet see or name. Often there's no obvious external trigger. Life circumstances might be fine. It's an internal collapse of meaning. This requires a different approach. Sitting with not knowing, allowing the dissolution of ego, trusting the process of transformation even when you can't see where it's going. The key question here is, what is this calling me toward? What wants to die so something new can be born? But here's the complexity. These aren't mutually exclusive. They can happen simultaneously. A spiritual crisis can trigger neurochemical depression. The stress of meaning collapse can dysregulate your brain chemistry. Clinical depression can force an existential reckoning. When you're that low, you have to ask fundamental questions about life, meaning, purpose. Many people experience both dimensions at once. And that's where it gets really tricky to navigate. There are two opposite mistakes people make when responding to suffering, and both can be really harmful. Mistake number 1: spiritualizing everything. This is when we take someone whose depression comes from trauma, neglect, biochemical factors, or life circumstances, and we tell them, "Oh, this is just your dark night of the soul. You need to sit with it. Embrace the transformation. This is your spiritual test." This is dangerous. This can be fatal. If someone is suicidal, they need professional help. Now, not spiritual platitudes. If someone's depression comes from being chronically neglected, they don't need to be told their suffering is some grand cosmic test. They need to be seen. They need relational healing. They need therapy. They need consistent, caring presence from people who show up. Spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with real psychological wounds, is not compassion. It's cruelty dressed up as wisdom. Mistake number 2: reducing everything to biology. But the opposite mistake is equally harmful. This is when we take every existential crisis, every meaning collapse, every spiritual emergency, and we reduce it to, "Oh, that's just a chemical imbalance. Here, take these pills." Sometimes people are depressed because they're living inauthentically, because they're working a meaningless job for 40 years, because they're in relationships that violate their deepest values, because they've abandoned what matters most to them. In those cases, the depression is the psyche's healthy rebellion. It's saying, "This life is killing you. Something needs to change." If we medicate that without addressing the existential dimension, without asking, "Is your life aligned with what matters to you?" we can trap people in what I'd call functioning numbness. They can get out of bed, go to work, do the dishes, but they're not truly alive. We need to honor both dimensions, the biological and the existential, the medical and the mystical. Okay, so with all that complexity, what do we actually do? Whether we're the one suffering or we're supporting someone we love. Here's my best attempt at practical wisdom. Step 1. Start with safety and stability. If there's any risk of self-harm, get professional help immediately. Call a crisis line, go to the emergency room, see a psychiatrist or therapist. This is non-negotiable. Address the basics. Are they sleeping, eating, moving their body? Connected to at least one person who cares? These aren't luxuries. These are necessities. Get therapy, especially if there's trauma involved. Modalities like EMDR, internal family systems, somatic therapy, or relational psychotherapy can be incredibly healing for attachment wounds and developmental trauma. Consider medication as a tool, not a cure. Sometimes medication creates enough space, enough relief from the worst symptoms, that you can actually do the deeper work. It's not a failure to take medication. It's smart. Step 2. Once stabilized, explore meaning. Once someone is safe and stable, then we can ask the deeper questions. Is my life aligned with what matters to me? What needs to change? Is it my relationships, my work, where I live, how I spend my time? What am I being called toward? Is there growth trying to happen through this pain? Sometimes the answer is yes, major life changes need to happen. Leave the toxic job. End the relationship that's killing you. Move to a new place. Reconnect with a spiritual practice. Whatever it is. Sometimes the answer is you need to grieve what's been lost and find meaning in what remains. And sometimes the answer is you're in a dark night. The old self is dying. You have to trust the process even though you can't see where it's going. Step 3. Hold both perspectives. The most mature approach is both and, not either or. Yes, tend to the biology. Your brain needs support. Take the medication if it helps. Eat well, sleep, move. These matter. And yes, listen to what your psyche might be trying to tell you. What is this depression pointing toward? What needs to change? Yes, get professional help for the mental health crisis. Therapy is real medicine. And yes, remain open to the possibility of transformation. Suffering can be the doorway to necessary change. Yes, depression is real suffering that deserves treatment. And yes, that suffering might be carrying wisdom or calling you toward growth. Most people need multiple approaches at once. And that's okay. That's actually how healing works. You know, I think we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. The question isn't, is depression a disease or a spiritual crisis? The question is, what does this particular suffering need? For the person feeling neglected, they need to be seen, to experience repair in relationships, to heal attachment wounds, to know that neglect is real harm, not personal weakness. For the person in existential crisis, they need to sit with uncertainty, to let old identities die, to trust the process of becoming even when they can't see the destination. For the person with trauma-based depression, they need safety, nervous system regulation, trauma therapy, someone who understands that their responses make sense given what they've been through. For the person whose brain chemistry is genuinely dysregulated through no fault of their own, they might need medication alongside everything else. And that's completely okay. Different suffering needs different medicine. And here's the beautiful, terrible truth. Often we need multiple kinds of medicine at once. When my family member told me about their depression from feeling neglected, the dark night of the soul framework wasn't what they needed in that moment. They needed to be heard, to have their pain validated, to know that someone cared enough to actually show up and stay present with their suffering. They needed to know that feeling neglected isn't a personal failing. It's a wound. And wounds need tending, not philosophizing. But exploring the dark night of the soul, doing this research, thinking through these distinctions, it helped me understand something crucial. Not all suffering is the same, and how we respond matters enormously. The synchronicity that brought both of these experiences to me at the same time, my research and my family member's confession, I don't think that was random. I think it was teaching me to hold both, the medical and the mystical, the clinical and the spiritual, the need for treatment and the possibility of transformation. Depression is real. The dark night of the soul is real. Trauma is real. Spiritual crisis is real. Biochemical dysregulation is real, meaning collapse is real. And sometimes, often actually, they're all happening at once. The wisdom isn't in choosing one explanation and dismissing the others. The wisdom is in asking, what does this person need? What does this moment require? What kind of healing is being called for? If you're struggling with depression right now, please, please, get help. Talk to a therapist, see a doctor, call a crisis line if you need to. You deserve support. Your suffering is real and it deserves real care. And also, stay curious about what your depression might be trying to tell you. Not instead of getting help, but alongside it. What needs to change? What's calling to you? What old self might need to die so a truer self can emerge? If you're supporting someone who's depressed, don't spiritualize their suffering away, and don't reduce it to just brain chemistry. Hold space for both. Be present. Ask what they need. And trust that healing can happen through multiple pathways at once. Thank you for being here, for wrestling with these hard questions with me, for caring enough about this to watch this whole video. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Take care of yourselves and each other.